whole in and through human energy and human actualization and human thought. So to use Whitehead's term, which is appropriate here, the many become one and are increased by one. That's kind of a shorthand way to talk about what's going on in Teilhard's view. Again, I just want to kind of point out here that he brings a type of theism, or I wouldn't even use that language anymore. I speak about Cosmo-theandric holism. That's in a sense my shorthand term, to say that God in the world, or this whole in the world, are in the process of becoming something more together, because the universe is grounded in a center of divine love. So that the evolution of God, the whole becoming more increasingly whole through complexity, and the evolution of humanity cannot be separated. And that leads Teilhard to say there's only one real evolution, and that is convergence, because it alone is positive and creative. So he advocates kind of open theism. It's not only the universe coming to be, but it is God who's coming to be. And therefore, he states in the future, only a God who is functionally and totally omega can satisfy us. In other words, he identifies the omega principle as God, in other words, as this absolute wholeness, which leads him then, you can see why he was never published, because his ideas were so radical, both for religion people and science people. They're like, what is this guy smoking? You know, so, but it's so intuitive, and it's so prophetic, and so way ahead of his time. He does advocate a type of pantheism. He writes on this. He wrote an essay on Christianity and pantheism. And he says Christianity is preeminently a faith in the progressive unification of the world in God, because it's universalist, organic, and monist. And therefore, when he says there's something taking place, in other words, the principles of Christianity in his view and the principles of evolution are very complementary. So he's out of the old school of religion and into something new here. His pantheism is based on the enfolding of consciousness upon itself through complexity, the rise of thought, the increased energy of love, and this personalizing principle. In other words, something that keeps drawing everything into greater unity through the centration of love. So the terms that he uses throughout his writings are pantheism, monism, personalization. We're a personalizing universe, meaning that thought is increasing, action and being driven by the energies of love toward more being. It's why we go into the streets and oppose things that are obstacles to unity, right? That this personal refers to the agglutinative, it's sticking together property of thought. So he thought that a new level of thought was emerging in evolution that would evoke a new type of person. A new type of person for terrestrial life on the level of the noosphere. So just for a way of summary here, in terms of his personalizing universe as holistic, evolutionary, panpsychic, pantheist, monist, directional, hyper-personalizing. In other words, we're never sufficient in our own person. We're always moving toward more person. We're always moving towards that collective unity. We're communal by nature, so to speak, and future-oriented. We're never satisfied completely with where we are. There's something that's pulling us onward to something beyond us, ahead of us. And that leads then to his work on his essays in the future of man. And this book, written, later on in his career, comes back to these three levels, of what he perceives of this process of evolution. And then now he begins in this work to focus on this level of the new Genesis. And he says this at one point, he says, the success of humanity's evolution will not be determined by survival of the fittest, but by our own capacity to creatively converge and unify. Basically, biological evolution, in his view, kind of maxed out in terms of diversity, and now we're in a new level of convergence. On the level of thought. And that leads him to, in a sense, describe this noosphere, this level of the mind. The word nous, from the Greek prefix nous, meaning mind, and you probably know this, Verdansky, or he picked the term up from elsewhere, probably Verdansky, the Russian scientist, but he uses it to talk about a superconvergence of psychic energy through as matter is building up in complexity. And he says the human acquires more being through interconnectivity with others. He himself lived at the dawn of the computer age and was really fascinated. So one thing to know about Teilhard, he was fascinated by the inventions of modern science, the computer. He was fascinated by nuclear energy and did write on the nuclear bomb, but did see the downside of things. And he was fascinated by collective movements where the energy of collective seemed to be there. With regard to technology, he said, there is this forward movement of spiritual energy and this maximization of consciousness. It was like, look what the computer can do. It can link minds together in a way that we have never experienced in the whole history of the human species. A complexification of our relationships towards more being and greater consciousness. So he saw this could be a plus on this new level of AI life. He anticipated the internet without ever knowing it. And therefore, he thought that this new computer, this level of noosphere, could lead us from the individual to a new type of person, what he called the ultra-human, from a level of personal reflection to a level of co-reflection. And he says we should consider interthinking humanity as a new type of organism whose destiny it is to realize new possibilities for life on this planet. Thinking together, so to speak, which we're kind of a little bit there, not always there. But he also thought it's not thought alone, right? And it's not just the intellectual pursuit alone. He said it is not tete-a-tete or core. He said what we need is a heart-to-heart. And basically what Teilhard realized is that this movement towards more being is not just about materialism alone. We can explain all the physical processes we want. We can narrow them down, explain all the details. But in Teilhard's view, spirituality, or an increase in psychic energy, an awareness of this whole, brings about more being. So he says technology can extend the outreach of human activity, but it depends on a broader use of human activity and how we control or kind of frame our psychic spiritual energy needs and powers. So, a kind of an AI world unbridled without any guidelines is a world I'm not sure I really want to go into too soon. He was a future thinker. He is a futurist because he sees this process of evolution is moving us towards something. And therefore, he thought the social integration of people around the globe into this kind of superhumanity presupposes a new self-evolution of the whole human towards a higher order. We're moving on to something. He thought that a basic mutation had taken place as he began to witness these kind of Marxian and Freudian moves in consciousness. But he also postulated another mutation, a greater awareness of our need of collectivity and the emergence of a higher collectivity of consciousness to a new reality. So he was attracted to these movements. He thought, wow, we have the potential to gather ourselves into a new collective unity. And he thought, if we could do that right, he says, this new higher socialization of humankind can be brought about if we have the will and the energy for it. If we believe in the value of the future, then we can have a zest for life, which is a great term for him, a zest for life, a taste of life, in a sense, in the advance towards more life. But he also noted how these movements of Marxism and communism, these totalitarian movements, actually just did the opposite. And he said, at no age in history has humanity been so well equipped and made so many efforts to create some kind of order out of its multitudes. Yet with communism and National Socialism, this has only ended up in the most appalling linkage in chains, in the crystal instead of the cell, the tertiary instead of the fraternity. Instead of the expected upsurge of consciousness, what we have is the mechanization that seems to emerge from totalization. So he thought it was actually a death knell. Everything that turns us into termites is wrong and under the sentence of death. Society, he said, will become a machine if its successive growths do not culminate in someone, that is, in a deep personal center of love, the kind of energy of love that binds us together. If we are thinking, perhaps, on a new level together, can we, in a sense, find a new way of being together in a unitive way of care, peace, nonviolence? So this idea of planetization is this new level that he anticipates on this level of super collective thought. This kind of socialization that is irreversible. He does indicate we're on an irreversible trend of macrobiological development. It's not, again, not deterministic, because it will abort if we do, in a sense, perhaps reach a level of warfare or choice that really warrants against these processes taking place. But he sees planetization as this arrangement of human mass and energy with this radiation of thought. So in his view, planetization can mobilize and empower us. After all, we're here, we're here from many different places. And that's the beauty, bringing in people on Zoom. We're already at the cusp of this kind of collective thought and mobilized power. And he thought that if we merge our political, ecological, and spiritual energies and activism into one framework of thought and action, we can begin to reach the next level. But planetization does call into question our most fundamental and entrenched assumptions, even how we position ourselves. This is what Teilhard thought. Something will explode, he said, if we persist in trying to squeeze into our old, tumble-down huts the material and spiritual forces that are henceforth on the scale of the world. And I think this is where we are now, right? We're beginning to collapse because we are actually not cooperating, you might say, with the energies of the universe. In his view, progress will be measured in the future by our ability to create a more peaceful, just, and ecologically sustainable world for all. How will we get there? In his view, it has to be a kind of new integration of science and religion within the whole. And that is there as seeing these two aspects of the one whole. In his view, science is too narrow, analytical, and fragmentary to take it on itself. This power now must be matched by attempts by a way of depth, a way of connecting, a way of experiencing this whole, a more holistic way of thinking that includes religion. So he speaks of a new type of person as the Homo progressivus, a future-oriented, future-affirming beings with a wide open awareness who have the energy of thought, the vision and perception to recognize the problems of the future and find their solutions, and who possess the necessary energy and the will to action for putting them into practice. I think right here we have some Homo progressivus, right? I think Ben Cassera and David Sloan Wilson and many of the great people here, Brian Swim, right? People who are thinking, Terry Deacon, yeah? People who are already thinking with an energy of thought and perception to recognize our problems, find the solutions, and to put an action toward the future. So Teilhard's holistic vision, it's evolutionary, it's convergent. Something is taking place, and as it's pulling us onward. It's universalist. It's not, there's nothing out there, there's no there, right? It's here, but the here is more than here. The here is beyond, it's within and ahead. In a sense, that's how he talks about God sometimes, as within and ahead, this power of wholeness. There's something that gets us up in the morning, right? There's something where thought, every thought, whether you're a scientist studying, physics or astrobiology, whatever it is, that thought is pulled into, this search for meaning that is not sufficiently, it doesn't end with that observation. There's always the moreness, and that's what attracts Teilhard, that moreness of life. So basically, in Teilhard's vision, we are a part of a creative whole of unlimited potential, where ourself and our world are constantly drawn into new existence together. What is the whole of the whole? that keeps it together. And that's what he calls the omega principle, the omega point. So that what he sees is this whole becoming more whole. That means whole in depth, whole in breadth, whole in future, wholeness in love. This is what omega is about. This whole constantly forming us from within, even as we work against it sometimes, is that which is ahead. It's what we're moving towards, that complexifying wholeness, which is ultimately love. So Teilhard says we will save by an option that has chosen the whole, but he says essentially it's love that will bring us to another universe. Thank you.
So we have time for a number of questions. Please come up to the microphone with your questions, though.
I think that some of the overlaps might be obvious, but could you please put Teilhard in conversation with Tao, if that's in your,
Yes.
in your abilities? Thank you.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. Teilhard in conversation with Tao. You know, he lived for 30 years in China. And one of the criticisms of Teilhard is he never really learned Asian religions. And the reason for that is that it's not that he said, oh, I don't like Asian religion. He was looking at structures of religion. And he felt that Asian religions were too acosmic. But truth is, his thinking is very complementary to Tao, right? I would totally agree. Like, I want to say, Teilhard, you know, guess what? You actually were a little bit, you know, Buddhist there, so get over it. But yeah, I would see a deep complementarity between Teilhard's thinking and Tao. Yeah, Confucius.
Well, I'm Francis Heiligen, one of the people who was mentioned there, so I wanted to react.
You're Francis Heiligen.
Yes, yes. Well, when you speak about the power of love attracting things together, that doesn't sound very scientific, but in my talk, which I will present later, I suggest that we can replace that by what I call synergy.
Yeah.
Synergy meaning that if two or more elements come together, they achieve more together than they could achieve alone. The idea of the positive sum, which is what you can see in very simple things like molecules where atoms stabilize each other, or particles stabilizing themselves into atoms, etc.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, synergy. I think that's very, very attuned to what Teilhard is describing, because he does speak about love, so to speak, on the level of molecules, on this level of, you know, pre-atomic life or whatever. But I like that idea of synergy. I think you'd be totally at home with that. Yeah.
And I had another short question, that is that the way I understand, I have not read they are in detail, but the way I understand you and understand others is that his idea of God is more like the end point of evolution rather than the beginning point. Isn't that...
That's correct, yes.
Isn't that very against traditional religious
It
dogma?
Is. It is. God is not, he never speaks about creator or creation in that way. The term he uses is creative union. There's something going on here that's unitive from the beginning. And therefore, you're right, if we are to use this language of God for Teilhard, it's the complexification of God. In other words, as this process is taking place, this God emerges through this process as that absolute wholeness up ahead. Yeah, so great ideas. I thank you for that. Yeah.
Daniel, thank you for an absolutely delicious talk. My name is Philip Beasley. I'm an artist and architect from Toronto. And my question rests in the rather astonishing characterization you gave of crystals, which I heard as being opposed to cells. And this confuses me and raises a myriad of questions about practice of how to work with wholes, in the sense that Buckminster Fuller's wonderful vision of a spaceship Earth is founded surely on order. My own obligation to clarity, to ethics, is surely founded on decision and saying no to some things as well as saying yes to other
Ah,
things.
yes.
And this question then of order as being something verging on evil seems latent in your talk.
Oh my, wow.
Could you speak about how to navigate the
Yeah.
difference between crystals and cells?
Yeah, did I use the language of crystals? I remember.
You did quite precisely in this in the
Oh,
slide. Yeah.
well, don't get, is a quote there? Oh, okay. Ah, okay. Oh, yes, yes. Those are his words, by the way. Yeah, so, not mine. So I just want to make that clear. Yeah, no, let me just say, kind of in a broad stroke way, because Teilhard, the one thing about him, sometimes he does use language that is not entirely clear what exactly he had in mind. I think I would not get too technical with how he's using this language, because in my view, if he says, let me go back to that, I know what quote you're talking, it's here. It's the crystal instead of the cell. What does he mean by what does he understand by crystal? That's the question. I think what you're saying there in terms of order. So two things that Teilhard would look as the mark of, in a sense, moving. And so it's not about coherence and fecundity. In other words, if you speak about an ethics of beauty or whatever, it is how, things are arranged together that deepen life and more cohere. In other words, they gave a greater sense of unity, coherence, not in so much of a, so evil, he thinks, is a natural aspect of it. When I say evil, I mean the dispersion of things, that kind of dissipation of things, he feels is in a universe this large will be part of the overall process. So he really doesn't write too much. This is a real criticism of Teilhard. He seems not to give enough credence or, give enough time to that question of evil. But he sees, in a sense, this dissipation overcome, in a sense, what David Wilson, in some sense, in other words, as things keep complexifying, because they keep doing that the greater complexity over time, in a sense, overrides the dissipation of things. It's sort of like a non-zero sum universe, if I can put it that way. Evil is real. Teilhard lived through a lot of suffering, a lot. So he knows evil firsthand. But that's not the end point for him. There's something going on, in other words, that gives greater coherence and unitive value to the coherence and fecundity of life that keeps moving life towards the up ahead. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I'm going to get rid of that quote right now. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Raphael Yogier, a French academic, philosopher. I was wondering, listening to you, if actually Teilhard de Chardin read Hegel.
Yeah.
Because I haven't seen any reference in Le Phénomène Humain by Hegel.
Right.
But when you read The Phenomenology of the Mind by
Yeah.
Hegel,
Yeah.
for instance, when he says that unity is actually the contrary of uniformity.
Mm-hmm.
And when you reach a higher level of unity, in the same time, it's a higher level of diversity.
Yeah.
And when he says that the mind is actually sleeping in the material world and is recognizing itself all by itself, outside itself, by the contradictions that looks like being a war on the first level, but on another level, the synthesis that could be translated by love
Yes.
creates something new that never existed before, but in the same times was already possible by the very nature of the process itself, etc., etc.
Yeah, that's
and
really
so at the end,
interesting.
he named God, the process itself that was already there, but just potentially there, and realized by the dynamic itself, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
So, because in a way, Hegel wasn't, I think, understood quite well, because he's supposed to be deterministic and materialist in a
Yes,
way, even
right.
if he's an
Yeah.
idealist, but it's not true.
Right.
But so I was wondering, but it's
Yeah.
almost so Hegelian.
Yes, I've seen that's a similar remark. I think others have noted a similarity between Teilhard and Hegel, but he himself never alludes to Hegel or shows
I know.
no familiarity with Hegel's thought, which is quite
Weird.
interesting.
really
So I
weird.
think there's a paper there that waiting to be written would be really interesting. So
And just another thing, I was amazed also by the prayer that I didn't know about matière, about the matière, because in fact I think is right against the people that think themselves as being materialistic.
Yeah.
Because matière could be translated mother, and it's emergence.
Emergence.
That means I will translate matière by emergence.
Yeah.
So when people think themselves as materialistic, they think the world as piece of dead stuff.
Yes.
But that's the contrary. That's exactly.
But you're alive.
Exactly.
Yeah. No.
Anyway.
I love your comments. Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank
Thank you. Yeah. Excellent. Oh, which one here? Here? Oh, the prayer. Yeah. I bless you, matter. That one. Yeah. So in a sense, who did, it was great. Super. Yeah. My friend here who just spoke. Yeah. He says, I bless you, matter. Right? In your totality, in your true nature. That's what he's saying. So he's a scientist, right? His day job is in the fields digging up old bones. And yet he's experiencing something. As he says, when I hold iron, there's something here. And every scientist, I think at the heart of it, there's an ineffable quality. There's a wow, there's a, what is this? And it says, you, I acclaim as the inexhaustible potentiality for existence and transformation. In other words, what he's experienced here is more than mere matter alone. It's not just the particles of hydrogen or carbon or nitrogen. These are not just, bits of sand or whatever hold together. There's something in the whole, the total consistency of that whole that has a depth to it that then speaks to him of what our language of God has, in a sense, spoken to him. That transcendence, he uses the language of a transcendent whole. By transcendence, he does not mean something that's out of this world. He means the overflow of experience. That's what transcendence means here. So he says, I acclaim you as the universal power which brings together and unites. I claim you as the divine milieu. That's the key phrase for him here, the divine milieu. In other words, as he says, there's nothing profane below here. There's nothing that's mere matter below here for those who know how to see. So he opens the human phenomenon with the power to see, not just vision, not in sense this objective science on how to see, but to see, the experience of seeing. So he says, raise me up then matter until at long last it becomes possible for me in perfect chastity, purity of heart to embrace the universe. And he says in another prayer, he says, even if I were to live if I were to lose my religion, he says, I would still believe in the world, because in the last course, it's the world itself that holds this power of love. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Heinrich Volmink. I'm a public health physician from Johannesburg in South Africa. I'm also an associate fellow of the Ubuntu Global Network. I'm really fascinated by your point around Teilhard and open theism.
Yes.
Of course, open theology linked to process thought speaks about possibility and probability, but not certainty.
Correct.
So it's great because it introduces human agency as an important factor, antithetical to the determinism in reductionist thought,
Correct.
but also introduces an element of risk.
Yes.
Right? So the march towards the omega point is perhaps not as certain, a bit more tentative.
That's correct.
Could you unpack a bit more about how Teilhard's thought overlaps with open theology?
Oh, perfect. Yeah, absolutely. He is a process thinker. In fact, I just ran a conference in September on Whitehead and Teilhard. Of course, Whiteheadians, are still Whiteheadians, but process theism looks at relationality as the ontology, as the basis of being itself. And that would be Teilhard. It's a relational world through and through. And you're right. In other words, agency is, in a sense, co-agent, as Whitehead's idea. God affects the world and the world affects God. Teilhard would have the same idea. It's co-agential in this way. And so that this movement is towards greater unity of the whole. In other words, where every part has a part to play in the whole, so to speak, which is very, very consonant with Ubuntu. Actually, I have a doctoral student working on Teilhard in Ubuntu right now. So I think there's much more work to be done here, but yeah, great question. Thank you. Thank you.
So again, we have 15 minutes. Thank Ilya, and thank all the wonderful questions.
Oh, are we done?
I'm afraid we have run out of time.
We're not done?
We are done. We have to 15 minutes for a break, and then off to the next.
Sorry about that. Did I just rush the...
Hello.
Are you going to be the next speaker?
Yes.
Perfect. I can set it up for you.
Okay, so I need to.
I can do it.
I think so. Am I in the auditorium?
Yep. Cool. Awesome. And you're just going to go via flash drive?
Yes.
Sweet.
And I think I'm going first, right?
You're going first, yeah.
And
And then
I'm
we're
done.
heading to a video presentation next. So
will you come in and take care of this? Or?
yeah, you can just close the laptop, grab your flash drive, and we'll switch it over.
Start reading the
I have another one.
with the file. Let me see. It's weird.
Let me
Is it
try
not
my. I
reading
have
that?
another flash drive. Let me try.
Yeah.
I brought two just in case.
And
Try this.
yeah, I know that this is like a newer computer or something. Summer's over 2020.
Like it recognizes there's a USB. I think it's a USB problem.
It's a problem with it.
Yeah.
But let's try that. And did you submit it to Sheila as well?
I did not.
Okay. Well, I'll grab my.
Thank you.
I have another computer too that we can use as backup. In short,
I sent it to myself. So.
Oh well, we could also
Yeah.
log it onto your email account.
Oh yeah, that would be convenient. So
I said we just try the.
yeah.
That looks promising.
Nothing. Let me see.
Yeah, let's try email.
Yeah, it's just like
Yeah, I know that this computer was recently set up, and so I think there might be some software.
Okay,
But let's just go email.
Is that,
if you prefer, I can.
go. Yeah, you go.
You can send it to me. Or
Oh wait, no, let's just add him in there,
yeah.
right?
Okay. That's great.
Email. Darn.
Saint Meinrad.
Yes.
Does that all look right? K.
Yep. Oh man. There's no way I can just do a search on
Let me
search
just.
for the email address. And
Yeah, we'll get this. I want to try this. I don't like that. Is it a Gmail or what's the system?
I'm at an educational KLM. You want my email address? Oh, St. Meinrad. mail.stmeinrad.edu.
Saint. How do you spell it? MEINRAD. MEINRED.edu. Is there a typo? I think I spelled it wrong. Saint Mine.
RAD.
And just so you know, we have a. All right, you want to try that?
That's right.
We still got plenty of time, so no stress. Starting 10 minutes, but we're running the show, so just.
Oh, good Lord.
I'm gonna grab my laptop just to see if I can get that USB to work on it as a backup.
Yeah.
Do you have a presentation on your phone? Maybe you can send it to my email and I can log in.
Yeah.
That's easier.
Hey, Alon, turn your radio on.
Sorry, it's on.
You don't have battery.
Who do I send it to?
Someone copy it where the presentation, he has like a problem with the presentation, so I'm copying him now with that.
Okay.
Thank you.
He's after me.
Almost.
What?
Or you can forward me the email.
I haven't tried to figure out how to do this thing. Oh, kidding.
There we go.
So,
Do you want me to type it? Yeah. Thank you. Yes, I do. Yeah, we're getting it through my email.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. No problem solved. It's like institutional science of the
Polarity presentation. I feel like if we can download it, yeah. Its original format was PowerPoint.
YouTube, but just videos.
Let me pick it up.
You all set?
Yep, I'm ready to go.
All
Thanks.
right.
Thank you.
The mic.
This over.
Whatever is on the schedule. Yes. Okay.
Hi, folks. The session is beginning. So please, if you're staying for our Berggruen Institute panel with Keith Lemna and John Haught, please take your seats, and we're going to begin right away.
Okay, let's get going here. I'm really looking forward to this. I know both of these individuals, and they're very thoughtful. We'll begin with Keith Lemna. He's an accomplished author and scholar recognized for his work, The Apocalypse of Wisdom, which won the 2020 Catholic Press Association Book Award in Theological and Philosophical Studies. His contributions extend to various scholarly journals, including the High-Trope Journal, I guess that's Hetrope, Nova Aevitate Terra, and Communio, International Catholic Review as well. Keith Lemna's expertise is also evident in his contributions to publications such as the revised edition of the New Catholic Encyclopedia and the Encyclopedia of Catholic Social Thought, Social Science, and Social Policy. Please welcome Keith Lemna.
I am sandwiched between two eminent interpreters of Teilhard. It's a daunting task. I'm not myself a scholar of Teilhard. Technically, I think his thought is extremely important. Terence Deacon asked me to present on Teilhard's reception in the Catholic Church, and I just got stuck on Pope Francis. So I'm going to present on Teilhard and Pope Francis today. So I'm going to be doing a reading of an important aspect of Teilhard's thinking on the noosphere through the lens of an important aspect of Pope Francis's teaching. My concern is to get a better understanding of humanity in relation to the world in the context of our ecological crisis. So with this concern in mind, the aspect of Pope Francis's teaching I shall focus on is his distinction between polarity and polarization, as found in his encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si. And this was working, but is not now working. So I should be going to another slide, but it doesn't seem to want to work for me. Okay, should this do now? Okay, that'll work. Thank you. So these two Jesuits that I'm focusing on today, Pope Francis and Teilhard, are both thinkers, I would contend, of dialectical polarity. And I'm drawing on lots of sources for Teilhard on this who've established this claim. Reading Teilhard through Pope Francis helps to bring out this polarity dimension in his thinking. This talk has two broad sections. The first will be on Pope Francis on the interconnectivity of all things through polar differentiation. And the second section will be on how Teilhard's philosophy of time helps to develop Pope Francis's concern to see the world in terms of relationality, affirming thereby humankind's need to aspire for a relationship to the world that is a more harmonious unity, a symphonic unity, if you will. So the unity and polarity understanding helps to envision possibilities for future action that are less threatening to the viability of our continued existence in the cosmos than approaches that view the noosphere in polarized fashion in relation to the universe seen as a purely objective other, fit for little more than to be put on the rack and tortured for its secrets, so that humankind can extend the limits of its dominion. And if Francis Bacon himself did not in fact speak those words, they are indicative of an attitude that has been prevalent. So first I begin with Pope Francis and polarity in Laudato Si. John Haught, the next speaker, has himself noted, and in several books on Teilhard, has noted a parallel between Pope Francis and Teilhard in his most recent book on Teilhard's cosmic vision. Each theologian, refuses to bifurcate modern religious concern with individual salvation from the concern for the destiny of the universe as such. In the case of Pope Francis, concern for the universe requires humanity to overcome the friend-enemy dialectic between humanity and the non-human other that has, in his view, tended to dominate the modern age. So I have a book up here on the screen by a political theorist who promotes a friend-enemy dialectic that is at present encouraging a kind of fragmentation in our world. And Pope Francis comes from an Argentinian theological school that quite consciously is proposing an alternative to this in politics, but then Pope Francis applies this different kind of dialectical understanding to the human and non-human, or the human other. And here's a quote from Laudato Si: "We need to develop a new synthesis capable of overcoming the false dialectics of recent centuries." And the official English translation translates dialectikos arguments. It should be dialectics. Translating it arguments tends to mute the force of Pope Francis's thinking on polarity versus polarization in the encyclical. Other translations have the correct translation. So Pope Francis is indeed a thinker of dialectical polarity and polar unity. And he follows in this regard a tradition of Jesuit reflection that stems from interpretation of Saint Ignatius of Loyola's spiritual exercises. This book here was extremely influential in Pope Francis's formation. There's a whole Jesuit tradition that surely Teilhard himself takes part in to some extent, of the spiritual exercises of Saint Ignatius of Loyola that read them in terms of dialectical polarity. But the notion of polarity in Pope Francis's thought has resonance with wider currents of modern thought with which he is familiar, like romantic and idealist traditions, for which the quest for unity was of paramount concern. These traditions sought to discover the deeper wholeness and unity that underlies all things. The exclusions and divisions of mechanistic materialism were thought by these thinkers to be ultimately superficial and delusory, and they aspired to develop a new approach. But the unity they sought for did not necessarily entail the eclipse of differences. For Samuel Taylor Coleridge, for instance, unity was realized precisely in and through multeity, or multiplicity. One of Coleridge's keys to understanding the true meaning of unity was indeed polarity. He says, every power in nature and in spirit must evolve an opposite as the sole means and condition of its manifestation, and all opposition is a tendency to reunion. This is the universal law of polarity. Coleridge, as with the esoteric theosophical tradition with which early modern science was deeply intertwined, understood polarity in part in terms of the unity of opposite poles in a magnetic field. Unity in this sense refers to harmony and cooperation. Polar unity does not refer to poles that are antagonistic and hostile to one another. The antagonistic construct of relationality refers to polarization, which is, of course, one of the most widespread topics of discussion in our culture today, and it seems to me self-evidently important for any discussion concerning the noosphere. So the antagonistic construct of relationality is polarization. A more harmonious sense of unity of things is polarity in this tradition. And though Pope Francis draws directly from Jesuit theologians in distinguishing polarity from polarization, his thought is very much in accordance with romantic poets or idealist philosophers. And I couldn't help but think of some connection here when the question was raised about Hegel in the last session. However, Pope Francis's understanding of polar unity is precisely what I have just described in Coleridge. He's not really using the romantics, but he's describing the kind of thing that they described. Unity, he insists, does not mean doing away with differentiation. It has to do with harmonious interconnectivity of the poles. Pope Francis has been insistently calling the Catholic Church, all Christians, all religions, anyone who will listen to him, usually not in the Catholic Church, to come together in unity in and through differences. He uses a precise image to describe the real unity toward which we are all called, the differentiated unity of a polyhedron as opposed to that of a sphere. It is unity through relationality and interconnectivity that perfects the terms of the relations. Interconnectivity and relationality are persistent themes in Laudato Si, understood precisely in terms of polarity. The current Pope understands humankind in relation to the non-human world in these terms. He strongly critiques what he considers to be false and destructive polarization between humanity and nature that has characterized the modern age, in no small part due to bad interpretations of Christian thought coming from Christians themselves. He insists that humankind possesses an imperative to overcome this polarization and to establish a harmonious polar unity with planet Earth. This imperative, it should be noted, includes recognition of human uniqueness. I think Italian theologian Massimo Borghese is correct to say that Laudato Si is a deeply humanistic text. However, he is at the same time strongly critical of false versions of anthropocentrism, but he does not, for all that, then counsel biocentrism. He encourages instead envisioning our relationship to the cosmos more as an I-thou relationship, rather than as purely subject-object relationality. Polarity between the human and non-human is maintained in and through difference by way of a more adequate theology, philosophy, and spirituality of relationality, which the Pope associates directly in the text of Laudato Si with the science of open systems, and he may have got that from Terence Deacon, at least indirectly. Terence has a story about this, by the way. So moving to the higher vista of polarity and relationality beyond polarization, we would no longer pit ourselves against the world as if we were necessarily involved in an antagonistic subject versus object confrontation. Pope Francis says that human beings endowed with intelligence and love and drawn by the fullness of Christ are called to lead all creatures back to their Creator. So I have a text from Laudato Si here, and this is the text where Teilhard is referenced in a papal encyclical, positively, not condemned as a heretic. And this is quite a development in Catholic theology. Although it should be said, all the post-conciliar popes have had good things to say about Teilhard. And the noosphere concept is especially important for Pope Benedict XVI in his pre-papal writings. But I want to turn to Teilhard himself now. So the second thing, polarity as it's manifested in how Teilhard thinks about time. So there are scholars who have shown that Teilhard thought in terms of polar dialectics. Several polar relationalities frame the contentions that he makes with respect to the noosphere and its development. For instance, the within or without of things, material and spirit, or most importantly for what I'm talking about today, humanity and the universe at large. Teilhard sets these polarities in the context of a durational vision of cosmic genesis as an eventual convergence toward unity through the perfected consciousness of humankind realized at the culmination of the omega point of history. This contextualization enables him to show forth the meaningful interconnectivity of the universe with creative union, which is the whole point of the universe for Teilhard, realized spatio-temporally in and through the leading shoot of its evolutionary advance, which he understands to be humankind itself in so many of his writings. But what more precisely is the relationship between humankind and the world in this process for Teilhard, and does it measure up to Pope Francis's insistent plea for the establishment of polar and harmonious unity between humankind and the universe as such? Certainly the desire to articulate the meaning and reality of interconnectivity that is common to both Teilhard and Pope Francis can be more fully realized if we do not simply focus on the synchronically instantiated ordering of the world, but direct our attention to the complex of interpenetrating webs of relationalities that are enabled by diachronic determinations and processes. All things in the physical universe are deeply intertwined, not only because there are non-local interactions between elements across space in instantaneously realized entanglements, according to some interpretations of quantum physics. These entanglements are formed together by a common history through a shared trajectory of time that embraces the spatiality and materiality of the universe in a conic movement toward ultimate convergence. I refer here to Teilhard's notion of the temporal grounding of relationality in Genèse. This approach establishes that the entire universe is constituted by a unified process through successive stages, moving toward a single unifying end made present in the transhuman or ultra-human figure of Christ for Teilhard. So you have ultimately Christogenesis, and that gives you a kind of rough sort of picture of the cone of time as he describes it in various writings, including in The Future of Man. One reason Teilhard is an important thinker is precisely because he saw with special clarity and depth the importance for human thought of the modern discovery of the interconnectivity of all things that is entailed by our new sense of time from physics and evolutionary biology, and what that discovery entails regarding humanity in relation to the cosmos, as well as the significance of human action to cosmic destiny. The convulsions of our age, he insisted, result precisely from our discovery of time in the modern sense. We have developed over the past 2 or 3 centuries a new understanding of the temporality of the world. We see that we are not simply thrown into a spatial expanse whose various elements are indifferently and arbitrarily collected together so that the presence of any particular element precisely in its spatiotemporal particularity would be of no intrinsic concern to all the others. The course of the universe and time makes us realize that it is not capable of locally circumscribed alterations effected arbitrarily through displacements or removals of objects. An example he uses is Socrates and Descartes. They couldn't change places with one another. They are temporally constituted as who they are. Such changes would induce impact on the totality of space-time that would have an unraveling effect. Bringing the dimension of time into our thinking enables a better grasp of how everything belongs together in an intrinsically relational bond and gives a broader perspective on the consequences of our actions in local environments. Teilhard delineates 3 fundamental characteristics of temporal development as we now know it that I think are of particular consequence. The first is that every constitutive element of the world emerges from some prior reality. Each particle of existence extends from the previous fragment to the next in an indivisible thread running back into infinity. The second is that the threads of elements thus formed are not extensively homogeneous, but represent in each stage a naturally ordered series in which the links can no more be exchanged than can the successive states of infancy, adolescence, maturity, and senility in our own lives. And the third is that there is no individual thread of succession in the universe that is wholly independent of the surrounding threads. These threads each together form a sheaf, which itself exists within a larger sheaf in a kind of concentric layering that continues on indefinitely. Time incorporates space into itself so that the two are integrated into a common progression in which space represents a momentary section of the flow which is endowed with depth and coherence by time. This philosophy of time helps us to understand more deeply one of Pope Francis's governing axioms: time is greater than space. He says that if we initiate processes, we can overcome spatial divisions, but I think this can have a kind of cosmic construal beyond what Pope Francis explicitly says. The universe, then, is an interconnected whole of lines of impact, spatially intertwined, ranging from the realm of the immense to that of the infinitesimal, and temporally intertwined, ranging from the abyss of the past to the abyss of the future. Of course, this spatio-temporal intertwining is for Teilhard a progress of evolutionary mutation, the cosmos itself being a big history. This big history moves in accordance with a law of increasing integrated complexity of elements in developed and developing organisms, from which increasing levels of consciousness emerge, until at length we reach the level of the human phenomenon, which represents a decisive mutation from zero to everything, as he once put it. Humanity's singularly organized and unified physico-chemical complexity as the ultimate product of evolution brings forth with its emergence a qualitatively unique development, a mutually reciprocating interplay of self-consciousnesses, of centers of self-reflection and personal movement, of self-determination. Humankind is phenomenologically distinguished from other species, first and foremost by the intensive centering of its being. Time and interconnectivity, then, have to do with the conic topology of evolutionary advance reaching to the human level as humankind assumes the responsibility that should accrue to it, leading the universe toward the end through the higher stages of love that Ilya was talking about, to the final convergence of all things. Which brings me then to my final section here. So, for Teilhard, as for Pope Francis, interconnectivity does not entail the elimination of difference. The process of genèse for Teilhard is not homogeneous but analogous, involving emergence. There is an analogy of duration, and Teilhard himself speaks in this manner. In traditional notions of analogy, you have the being of the universe understood in terms of similarities and differences on different levels of hierarchically stratified realms, and Teilhard kind of inverts that to a historical perspective, an evolutionary perspective. But the book that I have on the screen is probably the most famous and important book on the traditional understanding of analogy, but articulated post-German idealism by Erich Schwara, another Jesuit who influenced Pope Francis. But Teilhard doesn't just repeat this old analogical understanding, and if you've read any of John Haught's books, you know, he says that we got to get beyond analogy, but the analogy that he describes is not what I'm going to be describing here with Teilhard. Because Teilhard transposes the pre-modern analogical construal of the world to the time dimension of the evolutionary understanding of modernity. So he proposes a dynamic analogy in which there is similarity and difference precisely with orientation to continuity and discontinuity in the historical processes of continuing creation, recognition of which enables us to protect difference and unity in the conic path of cosmogenesis that leads ultimately to the culmination of the unity of the universe. So difference and continuity are understood as sort of the replacement for similarity, or continuity and discontinuity are the sort of replacement for similarity and dissimilarity in the older vertical analogical understanding of things. But you still have similarity and difference working with Teilhard in a very emergentistic kind of understanding. Teilhard himself compared his understanding of analogy to the scholastic concept of being, and he says this, he says, what he talks about, what I've just been describing, he said this himself, I'm quoting it from one of his great scholars, Henri de Lubac, who wrote 5 books on Teilhard. It is the ancient scholastic truth, but rejuvenated in the light of duration. So everything is related precisely through a genetic and dynamic movement of things on the basis of pre-existing analogates. There are histories within an overarching total history of the cosmos. The plurality of histories is distinct, but interdependent, correspondent, and interactive. The processes of transformation that mark the genesis of the universe in its different stages, keep going back to this classic sort of diagram, work in accordance with profound likenesses and ever greater differences through the mutual development of species and the higher formations of complexity consciousness, as all things are moving and moved toward unity in which differentiation is perfected rather than abolished. So what Ilya was talking about. You have the personalization of the universe. So the realities emergent in distinct stages of the universe are irreducible to earlier stages. This unity and duality creates a dialectical tension between the levels or stages, but the point of the dialectic is ultimately to enable polar unity, unification that personalizes rather than individualizes. That's a distinction Teilhard himself makes. Personalization rather than individualization. That centers and harmonizes rather than disperses in antagonistic disconnection or collapses onto a level of homogeneous univocity. Univocity is different than analogy. It's about everything just being undifferentiatedly united. And that's not how Teilhard is seeing the convergence of the universe through history and time. So the ultimate unity toward which all things are moving in the evolutionary universe is a center-to-center unity through which the deepening of consciousness and consciousnesses is enabled. A radial unity, the unity of the within. The drops of the ocean all have their consciousness in this perfected unity of creation or of the universe. It is true, however, that the center-to-center unity that Teilhard envisions in its final eschatological form is sometimes taken by commentators and scholars of his work to refer only to human individual beings, human persons, in their love for one another in the body of Christ for Teilhard. But what of the non-human world in this? Some insist that he holds that the final termination of history, when noogenesis reaches its culmination in Christogenesis, the material world will be jettisoned. I'm not sure if this is the correct interpretation of Teilhard. It could be that he means that in the end, this final unification of all things will be a perfection that we can't anticipate, or if it is, it's not even a static thing, I don't think, for him. But he has been criticized. John Haught notes this in his recent book on Teilhard. He's been criticized for both ignoring and contributing to the ecological crisis. And if his eschatological vision is something along the lines of what some commentators have said, where there's this jettisoning of matter, I could see how that might encourage a kind of instrumentalization with respect to the world. But I don't think that's the proper interpretation in the end of Teilhard. Now, he didn't think of the environmental crisis the way we do. He's in a different age. He's in a different context. But let me conclude with a brief defense of Teilhard in this regard, drawing on his notion of duration. So I have more techno-pessimistic kinds of instincts than Teilhard seemed to possess. So sometimes I would like him to go a little more deeply in his critique of where the technology could be going. But on the other hand, I can see no way out of our current crisis if it does not include a new sense of the intrinsic link between humanity and the cosmos. And no one revived our sense of this link more powerfully and suggestively in the 20th century than Teilhard himself, precisely with his understanding of duration and time. With respect to the cone of time in the development of the noosphere, he does not collapse levels of evolutionarily transformed speciation into one another, which allows for otherness and polarity and a kind of center-to-center union to be understood in his manner of thinking. But even more, his insistence that the cone of time establishes each thing as possessing a kind of necessity, even if it is not absolute, in the genesis of the world, leads ultimately to an understanding that each thing that stands before us reveals the whole in a unique and irreducible manner, because necessary to the whole precisely when the thing is and not only where it is. You have a durational understanding of the part revealing the whole. This is it seems to me, a powerful development in how we think about time and history and the world and our place in relation to all these factors. And I'm not sure that anyone ever drew this out the way he has done. Maybe so in those 19th century thinkers, maybe in the idealists or the romantics, but I find it comes out in a very powerful way, post-evolutionary thought, post-Darwinian evolutionary thought in Teilhard. So his durational philosophy and theology promotes verification at a deeper level than a one-sidedly spatial construct can do, that everything possesses deep importance in relation to the totality of the cosmos, precisely through its singular whenness and not only its whereness. Its time and not only its place. Not that those things can be separated, but you can bring out the temporal dimension, the durational dimension better. Things do not get absorbed into the relational fabric of the cosmos, but are interdependent with the entirety of the whole, which depends upon them to be what it is. However, we cannot fully know the meaning of this interdependent, open system of interconnectivity that is the cosmos and all its singular events in its total duration until the future is given to us. And that's what John Haught really focuses on in his books. I assume we'll hear something about this in the next talk. And I'm going to bring this to conclusion now. It seems to me that Teilhard's durational vision, which includes the polarity element, where you have unity through difference, where there's otherness, where there's center-to-center union, where there's communion. I think this can help us to understand what Pope Francis is getting at when he says the message of each creature and the harmony of creation points to the fact that each creature has its own purpose. None is superfluous. If everything is woven together in the fabric of time and duration the way Teilhard understands it, we have a strong, powerful sense of the kind of necessity, not a deterministic necessity, but the kind of necessity of each thing for what it is. And this enables us to, it seems to me, see the integrity of each thing more clearly. And then the other thing I have highlighted here at the bottom of this passage from Pope Francis, the history of our friendship with God, he says, but I mean, he's talking about special places in our experience, but these special places are also special times. And so what I'm really getting at here in this talk is I think that Teilhard helps us to see in a new light these famous first four lines of William Blake's Auguries of Innocence that were probably read to all of us, or that we read at a young age. They've always been very powerful to me to see the whole and the part, but now understood in terms of the durational convergence of the universe and how everything is necessary for that development. It's a beautiful way, I think, of seeing the evolutionary development of the universe. I can't stand here today and defend it from a scientific perspective, but phenomenologically speaking, I think that what Teilhard has done with his durational understanding can really give us this powerful view of things again, how everything is interconnected in this polar unity. So that's how I'm going to end. I thank you for your time today, and the next speaker is the main attraction, so we'll get to John. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is John Haught. He's a prominent theologian and distinguished Teilhard de Chardin scholar, currently holding the position of Distinguished Chair, Research Professor of Theology at Georgetown University. With a focus on Roman Catholic systematic theology, Haught delves into intersections between science, religion, evolution, and ecology. His extensive body of works includes 24 books addressing topics ranging from God's role in the universe to the cosmic visions of Teilhard de Chardin. Among his recent publications are God After Einstein, What is Really Going On in the Universe? Doesn't that sound great? And The Cosmic Vision of Teilhard de Chardin. Haught's scholarship reflects his deep engagement with issues related to physical cosmology, evolutionary biology, geology, and their intersection with Christianity. John Haught. Okay. It's coming. What did you say? Keith, you want to answer a question while we wait? No? May as well use the time well, huh? Anybody have a question for Keith?
Any questions?
Give us another talk.
No, I can't do that. I'm talked out. Nothing? No? We need to hear John.
Maybe you could just, is it ready? Maybe you could say something about the history of papal attitudes toward Teilhard de Chardin.
Well, yes, that was good, the original idea for the presentation. And of course, pre-Vatican II, the attitudes were negative, and there was a warning issued against this.
Well, I want to thank that I'm not able to be there in person, so I especially appreciate your attention now. I'm going to share my slides with you. So what I'm going to suggest is that we really can't understand or appreciate Teilhard de Chardin's understanding of the noosphere unless we place it within the context of his cosmic vision. And since I've recently written 2 books, one on Teilhard, one on Einstein, the thought has occurred to me recently that it would be nice if we could listen in to a conversation between these 2 scientific giants, whom I'll introduce to you in a moment. This is a conversation that never actually took place, but it could have taken place because both Teilhard and Einstein were exiles from Europe in the 50s. And Teilhard was working at the American Museum of Natural History, while Einstein was at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton, New Jersey. And so they were only miles apart. And interestingly, they died only days apart in the spring of 1955. So I'm going to propose that I be a kind of moderator in this hypothetical conversation. And first I'll introduce Einstein and then Teilhard, and then see what they might have thought in terms of a conversation, with a serious conversation of one with the other. Einstein, of course, is known as the greatest scientist of our age. And this was primarily because his theory of general relativity transformed our whole understanding of the universe in a way that actually, as we'll see, made Teilhard's own life and fame possible. He thought of time, perhaps for the first time in human consciousness, as inseparable from matter. Time and nature are so tied up with each other that if time suddenly came to a halt, nature would disappear as well. And this is different from the way in which many philosophers and certainly theologians had thought of time before this. Time and space were considered like containers into which God, if you were a theist, poured the content of creation. They were sort of pre-existing molds or forms into which creation was poured. So what Einstein did was quite revolutionary, and Teilhard was one of the first to pick it up, and that's to show that time is inseparable from nature. And that means, therefore, that the cosmos, if you allow that time is irreversible, which Einstein did not do at first, if you allow that time is irreversible, if it's tied essentially to nature, that means that the whole cosmos can now, maybe for the first time, if I'm not mistaken, be understood as a story, as a drama, perhaps. Einstein, however, did not see that. He did not see the universe as a story. And it was because I think he loved eternity more than time. And ironically, this bound him more closely to some of Teilhard's religious ancestors than it did to the cosmology that developed after Einstein. He thought that religion, if you ask him what his religious life was, what his spirituality was, he would say it's getting close to timelessness. It's timelessness alone, he thought, that can deliver us from the cruelties of perishing and death that occur in the temporal world. For him, access to this world of timelessness was not by meditation or prayer or hope, but by way of geometry. And this gave geometry a kind of sacred significance in his understanding of things. He had no need, therefore, for religious consolation of a personal God, the God of Abraham, the prophets, and Jesus. That was not part of his way of thinking. In fact, it was contrary to his way of thinking, especially about the nature of science. So he was content with an impersonal universe as long as it was reliably attached to this domain of timeless geometric forms, which underlay his whole cosmology. Meanwhile, Teilhard, as most of you know, is a Jesuit priest, also by profession a geologist, a paleontologist, and hence an evolutionist. And when he was still a young priest, he started writing essays on how you could connect his Christian faith with his evolutionary understanding of life and of the universe. Well, his religious superiors got wind of these experiments and thought, and they were afraid that they were just a bit too adventurous for the time. So they literally persuaded, maybe even exiled Teilhard to China, which is the wrong place to send people who like to dig up old rocks and bones. Because while he was there in China for a quarter of a century, he developed a sterling scientific reputation as one of the top 2 or 3 geologists of the Asian continent. In his spare time while he was in China, he started writing his main work. We now call it The Human Phenomenon. Then it was called, his first English translation was The Phenomenon of Man. And it was in this book that he introduced the notion of a noosphere within the context of his attention in that book to show that mind or thought is completely part of the cosmos. At any stage of thought, it's just as much a cosmic reality as it is a human or terrestrial reality. He died relatively unknown in New York, where he was working at the American Museum of Natural History in 1955, very much alone and unknown. He's buried now in Poughkeepsie, New York. What I want to accentuate about his thought was that he was one of the first scientists in the 20th century to have seen the spiritual and cultural and intellectual significance of Einstein's universe, even in a way that Einstein himself did not see, at least at first. For Teilhard, the universe became increasingly, in his mind, a drama, a story, a great drama of awakening. Awakening to what? We'll see in a moment. But for him, God is the elusive personal horizon to which the whole cosmos is awakening by way of what's happening to mind and thought in our terrestrial precincts and perhaps elsewhere in the universe. So for him, the noosphere is primarily a new epoch in cosmogenesis, that is in the becoming of the universe. The universe is unfinished, but the cosmogenesis consists of a kind of increased gradual intensification of awakening to God, ultimately in his thinking. So if I had the two together in conversation and I were moderating the conversation, I would ask each of them to give me a sense of what gets them up in the morning, what gives meaning to their lives. Einstein would have no difficulty in answering that question. What gives meaning to his life is the rapturous amazement, these are his words, at the harmony of natural law, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that compared with it, all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection. So his faith was a cultivation of the mystery, of the comprehensibility, the intelligibility of the universe. A great mystery because we don't know why the universe is intelligible, but thankfully it is. It is beyond question, this sense of mystery and this rapture at the harmony of natural laws, closely akin to that which has possessed the religious geniuses of all ages. So he felt that his cult of timelessness allied him very much with all those religious people throughout the ages who have made attachment to timelessness and detachment from time the goal of their religious lives. If I asked Teilhard the same question, he would say the only thing that keeps me youthful and active, he would often say what gives zest to my life, is the growing belief that there is something immense, something beautiful about to take place, something that's coming in the future, in other words, throughout the world, throughout the universe is what he meant. And that we must abandon ourselves. This is the good life for him. The good life consists of abandoning ourselves to the mighty current of this development in which the universe is awakening to something more up ahead. So to summarize, the spiritual life of each of these men understood it. For Einstein, spirituality is the sense of being carried out of time into the timeless mystery of the universe's geometric comprehensibility. I can picture Einstein going into his study every day, sealing the door behind him, and figuratively speaking, bathing himself in the eternity, the timelessness of the numbers and patterns of mathematics and geometry that put him in touch with something solid, something consistent, something that could respond to his anxiety. For Teilhard, the spiritual life consists of the sense of being carried forward by time into the immensity and beauty of what is not yet, of something more up ahead, the sense of belonging to a universe that is still coming into being. And since for Teilhard, being and consciousness are correlative notions, the way in which the universe becomes more is by becoming more conscious. Well, if the conversation were to continue, I think Einstein would immediately say to Teilhard, I don't see the cosmos going anywhere at all. There can be no real increase or more being emerging in the universe than the universe already has accessible to it. By way of geometry, we can see that the beauty of the geometric forms and patterns that have always underlay the universe, that's reality enough. So let's get in touch with that to get in touch with the real world. And as many of you know, even today, there are theoretical physicists who have the same kind of metaphysics, a metaphysics in which the really real is the timeless, something that Teilhard vehemently rejected. If I asked Einstein, does this mean you believe in God? He would say, I believe in Spinoza's God. Spinoza, as you know, was an early modern philosopher who taught that nature and God are two words, two names for all that is. So there's nothing that transcends nature because nature is already complete and full and finished. And I think this affected Einstein's understanding of faith and eternity as well. Since nature in traditional theology had the attributes of eternity and necessity, that means Spinoza thought that nature has the attributes of eternity and necessity, which means that nature is already complete. The universe is finished. God, or if you want to call it nature, is complete. The future, in the sense of the temporal future of what is to come, has already been closed off from eternity. And that makes the laws that run nature indestructible and eternal also. And this is the basis for Einstein's objection to the whole notion of a personal God. If nature is a closed continuum of causes and effects, then the laws of science that determine this cause and effect relationship apply absolutely and cannot be violated. So the existence of a personal God, a responsive God, a God to whom one could pray, would interrupt the laws of nature. For such a God to be known as such, God would have to violate the regularities of nature. And this cannot happen if we really respect and love science the way Einstein did. A responsive God, a prayer answering God, an intervening God would signal the end of science. So there is no reason in his spirituality to pray. I believe he would accept the sarcastic definition of prayer that Ambrose Bierce gives in his Devil's Dictionary, that prayer is asking that the laws of the universe be annulled in behalf of a single petitioner, confessedly unworthy. And so prayer would seem to Einstein also to be something quite absurd, quite contrary to the nature of reality. Now, interestingly, Teilhard's own early religious training was essentially a cult of timelessness. He was following the Catholic spirituality that had gone back centuries, that had been influenced by Neoplatonism through Augustine and others, and then by Greek philosophy and Aquinas. This venerable tradition of his own Catholic theological understanding was itself, it seemed, for the young Teilhard, a cult of timelessness. And I think he was starting to bite at this bit with some aggression, even rather early in his thinking, certainly by the time he was a young priest. This scheme that he was raised in, and that I, as a Roman Catholic, was also taught in, this is what I cut my religious spiritual teeth on, starting in the 40s and 50s. This scheme was a static, vertical, hierarchical level of layers, which operate according to what you might call the hierarchical principle. And that principle maintains that understanding a lower level in the hierarchy is not enough to qualify you to understand a higher level. Following the tradition, not just in Christianity, but many other religious traditions, there was a sense on the part of the great mystics that you need to undergo a personal transformation in order to become adequate to understanding or to come in contact with the higher levels in the hierarchy. So this was Teilhard's spirituality. The more important something is, the more immaterial, the more elusive it is. You see the influence of Plato on Catholic spirituality. So much so that Nietzsche once commented that Christianity is Platonism for the people. And there's a certain truth in that, which Teilhard would eventually agree with. So if there is an ultimate meaning, an ultimate reality, it would lie beyond human comprehension due to the hierarchical principle that a lower level cannot comprehend or grasp a higher level. However, in Teilhard's Christian tradition, even though you can't grasp a higher level, you can have a sense of being grasped by it. And in Christian theology, from Aquinas to Paul Tillich, that was the understanding of faith. Faith is an awareness of being grasped by and allowing yourself to be carried away by something higher in being, something more elusive, but something more real. And since we can't directly refer to this, we have to talk about it symbolically or analogically or metaphorically, something for which we never were taught to apologize, because the fact that we have to use fuzzy language in faith and theology is a mark of the eminence or excellence of that to which we are trying to refer. So this scheme still gives meaning to the lives of millions. And I think if Teilhard were here, he would say even billions of people in our terrestrial precincts. The meaning of life is to allow yourself to be carried step by step into a climactic communion with timelessness. And that would mean detaching yourselves from the various layers, especially the lower levels, the material levels of the hierarchy. So it's important to understand that this was the framework of Teilhard's early spirituality. And in a way, it's closer to Einstein's cozying up to timelessness than it is to the implications that other scientists were drawing out of Einstein's relativity equations. After Einstein, Teilhard, as I said, was one of the first scientists to realize that Einstein had changed, if you look deeply into his science, had changed the whole understanding of the universe as something that's still coming into being. So for Teilhard, the most important religious and theological question was not how can I get close to timelessness, but what's going on in this drama that we call the universe. And for Teilhard, we'll see what's going on is it's a drama of gradual awakening. And we have to situate the noosphere as, at least from an earthly point of view, the latest stage in this cosmic awakening to what? To infinite meaning, to infinite beauty, to infinite goodness, to infinite truth. Names which in Teilhard's scholastic training were used to refer to God. So traditional spirituality explains why Christians and other religious people, for the most part, even to this day, have very little interest in the question that Teilhard was interested in, what's going on in the universe. Traditional spirituality and religious education points most Christians and many other traditions to something beyond time, to an eternity, which means timelessness, up above. And that in order to reach that, we have to detach ourselves from the earth. And it's not even interesting to people who have this spirituality, what's going on in the universe. Whereas that became the main question for Teilhard, and that's where he wants us to locate his understanding of the noosphere. Science, starting with geology, then with Darwinian biology, which Teilhard embraced, and then with Einstein's cosmology, as interpreted by Lemaitre and others who had also witnessed the findings and discoveries of Fred Hubble and his staff at the Mount Wilson Observatory of the red shift of the galactic light, giving smoking gun evidence that the universe is still expanding and that the universe is still coming into being. Science has opened a new horizon, the horizon of this worldly future to human consciousness. And instead of fleeing from that awareness, as many of his religious colleagues, theologians, and his family and friends did, Teilhard made the future of the universe the horizon of his, not just scientific thought, but of his religious thought. And he did this on the basis of the fact that deep down in his own Christian tradition, the prophetic tradition, the thinking of Jesus and St. Paul and others, the sense that God inhabits the future more than the sphere of timelessness began to affect Teilhard much more deeply after he realized that the universe itself is moving toward this new future. And so he wants to locate the noosphere as a new chapter, as a new epoch, you might say, not just in terrestrial history, but in a cosmos. Teilhard talks a lot about the Earth, but the Earth is something he wants to talk about because it's a portal into the cosmos. He's basically a cosmic thinker, not an earthly thinker. So he can easily be mistaken for being too terrestrial, but his ultimate objective was to talk about the universe and to talk about his faith in the context of this understanding of the universe. If we understand the universe apart from God, then our understanding will collapse into pure naturalism. And the problem with naturalism is that it doesn't love nature enough. For Teilhard, if you really love nature, you want it to be not only beautiful, but everlasting. And so he wants to give us a universe which is consistent with the basic religious impulse to embrace something indestructible. But he wanted that indestructibility not to be located up above in some sphere of timelessness, but up ahead in the fulfillment of time. So stay with time is his message, because time itself might have a fulfillment. But if it's to have an indestructible goal, it has to have a kind of quality in which this goal lies up ahead rather than up above. So think of God not so much as up above, but up ahead. And you'll be more in touch with the Abrahamic tradition than with the Platonic strain of thought that influenced Christianity and other traditions over the last 2,000 more years. So if Teilhard were here today, he would fully embrace the post-Einsteinian cosmology, which consists of the 13.8 billion year cosmic story that science is now telling us. Except that Teilhard would want to emphasize the story is not over. If you collapse or express the temporal scale of the universe in 30 big books, each book being 450 pages, each page representing 1 million years in the story, you can get some sense of the magnitude of the immensity of time and space. The Big Bang would take place on page 1 of volume 1, and the first 2 shelves and part of the third would consist of essentially lifeless and mindless material processes and mindless stuff. Life begins after the Earth spins out around the sun 4.5 billion years ago. 1 billion or so years later, life begins in a very unenthusiastic way, and it doesn't become really complex until you get to the end of volume 29. Dinosaurs come in after the middle of volume 30. They go extinct on page 384, and mammalian life, and eventually, starting several pages for the end of volume 30, the phenomenon of what Teilhard calls thought. That's the technical term he gives to the emergence of consciousness in this story. Thought emerges. First there's matter, then there's the epoch of life, and then moving fastly toward the present, the epoch of thought. And in this epoch of thought, he wants to include not just the thought of individual minds and brains, but of the whole Earth. The phenomenon of thought is now a planetary phenomenon, influenced by technology, by education, by human psyche, human social tendencies, capacity to relate. It's the sphere of mind that has superimposed itself upon the biosphere, the noosphere, he calls it. So the noosphere has been in the works since the beginning. The universe has always been a kind of awakening since its very first moments. In this scheme, thought, since it just came about the last few pages of the last volume, can seem to be, to the scientific naturalist and scientific materialist, kind of like a cosmic afterthought. Whereas for Teilhard, it's been in the works from the very beginning. And so that's why the noosphere is so important. It makes explicit, more than any other phenomenon in the cosmic history, that the universe is a drama of awakening. When we look at the 30 volumes here, all the gray ones where life does not exist might suggest, and it has suggested to most scientists, that the universe is essentially mindless and lifeless. But Teilhard's point in writing the phenomenon in all of his other literature was to point out that this means nothing if you understand the universe as an awakening. Thought has been brewing in this process from the very beginning. And these 30 volumes might turn out to be only the dawn of this awakening that he calls the universe. And so his understanding of science and religion is that we can make better sense of them if we see them as different ways or different levels of explanation, trying to read in depth this cosmic story. But since the story is still going on, we can't stop reading, and we can't decide immediately here and now that the story is over, or that we know by dint of science or any other discipline what the universe is all about. We have to adopt the posture of expectation, bridled expectation, of looking forward, of accepting the unfinished character of the universe and accepting the limitations of our understanding of the story of awakening, of which we are a part, like a fish in water, and cannot get outside of it to see what's actually really going on. So he's especially disturbed at what happened to his classic hierarchical spirituality. This cosmic story has seemed in the mind of most people who look at it to signal the collapse of the classic hierarchy, which was the framework for spirituality and piety in the past. Matter, which was the lowest level in the traditional pre-scientific hierarchy, is now the dominant feature of this new cosmography. Life comes in only as a fluke in volume 22. And mind, in the sense of human consciousness, doesn't come in until the very last page, maybe the last fifth or the last tenth or so of the very last page of the very last volume. This is when not only thought, but ethical aspiration and our faith traditions, including Teilhard's tradition, come into the cosmos. So it might seem, therefore, that meaning is something that we humans have projected back onto those lifeless volumes of the cosmos. But for Teilhard, the emergence of a longing for meaning, including Einstein's own longing for meaning and longing for something indestructible, is an essential part of the cosmic story. And we can't understand the cosmic story if we divorce it from mind, or if we divorce it now from what mind is turning into, this new and still developing phenomenon that we call the noosphere.
So there is more, a little bit more. This talk ran longer than we realized and came in at a time when we didn't apparently check it to make sure that it was in the time. So don't worry though, this will be posted on the Human Energy website very soon, and you can rewatch the whole thing, or you can skip to minute 38 or whatever it was and catch the rest of it. I really regret we don't have time for Q&A right now. Our plenary address coming up, our closing event of the day, does require substantial time to set up, and so we have to allow that. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Bill and Keith and John in the noosphere, for a great session. Lots to think about, lots to mull over. We have a 15-minute break, and Jaron Lanier will be our closing plenary this afternoon, followed by a reception.
And I'm a Balinese Suling winner.
Oh, wonderful.
Anyway, you're busy. We'll talk about it later.
Yeah, you mean the one in Santa Cruz?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, those are friends.
Oh, yeah, they're really a sweet group.
Yes. So yeah, I play all the time.
Oh, that's great. Secretariat or?
Gavin Castori, Sukajaya, and a couple of groups in Bali.
Oh, great. Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, it was, that was sort of a tourist toy suling that he had around, but I was able to get it.
So was that just on the spot, or did you practice?
So, no, this is I hadn't played a suling in many years.
Yeah.
Since years ago with Michael Tenzer, 40 years.
Did you actually play in the group, like the regular way?
No, I just
improvising.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I once did oh hey guys up there.
I'm on my way down.
Okay, cool. Bring some XLR cables, okay?
Yep.
Thank you.
Alon, can you grab those from the things?
You're busy. Maybe I'll catch you later.
Yeah, all right, take good care. Hey, thanks for doing this, Mark. I'm sorry it's a little flaky last minute thing, but I think it's a good group, and you're going to speak there or something. I don't know. Let's see. Something like that. Sure. Let's see.
Hey, how's it going? Hold on, you need XLR cables. Yeah.
Oh, microphones. Quarter-inch cables. Hey, I have a crazy question. What if I wanted to address from being seated so I could go back and forth playing easily instead of at the podium? Would that be weird?
Yeah, you want a mic stand?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. I appreciate that. Improvise a little.
I like it. Yeah, let's check.
Yeah. Thanks for rolling with it.
Yeah. It's my pleasure. Makes it more interesting. I'm excited to hear your music too.
Oh yeah, well this is going to be a very new and experimental idea.
Okay.
So we shall see. Yeah. All right.
What size are you? I don't have anything that small. Yeah, put this in.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really kind of you. Doesn't fuck up somebody with a camera or something. That's me. All right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not really great.
Check, check, check.
Oh. Can I ask for another really weird little thing? Yeah. A little cup of water.
Oh yeah, that's not good. That's a necessity. I'll get you some.
Thank you. Hey, what? It's a controversy. Popular. No, if it's about consciousness, because consciousness and contrapositions are almost the same word. No, it's popularized by Beethoven, and well, what I was thinking about is, the duduk, the Armenian instrument that's supposed to represent spirituality in the movies, and I thought this would be like the giant version of it. So this is like the noospheric version. Conscious bassoon. Well, no, I mean, the amazing thing about the duduk is it's no matter what the culture is, like if it's an ancient Chinese guy or an ancient alien, they always play the duduk, even though it's Armenian. So I figure this would be the cosmic version of the duduk. That's the idea at any rate. Then what? No, that's Mark playing that. Mark Deutsch's instrument. You've heard that he's all right. So that I think is gonna go there, and then this.
What do you need for me here? Is it a microphone, or is it?
The microphone is for me to talk, and then I need an XLR with phantom.
Okay.
And a little cup of water.
DI box.
Well, XLR with phantom, so that would be a DI box, yeah. I mean, it could be a box, it could be a cable, it doesn't really matter. A cable, well, I need at least a cable to get from this device to the box. So I'm just dropping some of my stuff.
Your water's right here.
All right.
Oh, that's so he was going to put his clothes on.
Hey. Hey, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm kind of in, all right, cool.
I have to negotiate space.
Yeah, I just need a little bit of water for my reed, but give me 1 sec. Yeah. Okay, so, and then, just be careful careful about the reed. You can put the water on the ground after a while. Let me just soak for a second. All right, cool. It's good.
This is your XLR?
Here, let me put that in, and then so that, let's get a moving phantom. And it's like this little mini preamp. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put this thing kind of like this. I'm going to put this here. And then, yeah. So, let me know when you want to.
So I need to go upstairs.
Okay.
Got it?
Water down there too. Hey. What? Well, we're about to. I'm sure it'll be fine. These guys seem great. How's everything going? Are you happy? Yeah. Yeah, this is good. I just took this a bit more. No, but you know, do you mind if I talk from the chair instead of from the podium, because that way I can switch back and forth.
I'm ready to check when you are.
I think I'm not good.
Just give me a second. Just give us a second to make What's your son?
Let me just, it got knocked out in a second. Not too bad, just one string. Is it sounding out there?
Just trying to study what you guys are doing.
Yeah, don't. Oh, never mind. You do the sound as you like. Make it all cosmic if you want, because it's a cosmic crowd.
Yeah, but it's like. Wow, let's hear it with this. That's my low A. I can hear you really well. I can hear myself. What? Can you hear me? It's okay. I can hear you. Yeah. Sure. My feet down, my feet down. We don't have time. All right. Should I go sit down? Maybe sit. You want to sit in the wings? You want to just call me up, whatever? Yeah, yeah. I'll talk from here. And this is working. Yeah. All right. Sure.
Let's take a few minutes to keep all this, what your excitement back together.
Maybe maybe have him less than moderate.
Good afternoon. We're about to start up again. Please pick up your drinks and wind up your conversations. Yeah, I heard that as well. Yep. Back up there in the sound booth, deal with the low hum feedback that we're getting, please.
Shelf the bass. That's a pretty shelf the bass.
What's that?
Shelf the bass. Yeah.
There we are. There we are. All right. So please come back to your seats. We have a real treat for the end of the afternoon. You don't want to miss it. All right, so it's a pleasure for me to introduce
Very sorry about the debris here.
no problem. I'm not falling down yet. So I'm going to introduce a someone I consider a close friend. One of the few people that I have no doubt should be called a genius or a Renaissance man. Not just because he's a major researcher in computer science, responsible for the concept of virtual reality, a Microsoft researcher, but also a consummate musician, a musician who understands world music in a way that very few people do these days. And as you can see, we're going to hear some music from some remarkable instruments that I've never seen before, but every time I walk into his house, there's at least 100 instruments I've never seen before. So with that, let me introduce Jaron Lanier, who has been one of the early visionaries to see that both the social media and internet systems that we have been an incredible value. Actually, a person who has contributed to their development, but has also recognized how they can go wrong, how they can be problematic, how it's demeaned us to some extent, and how it may be, in fact, somewhat dangerous. His books like I Am Not a Gadget, or his recent description that you should get rid of your social media today, now. Give us a sense that this is someone who's really thought deeply about an area that he's contributed to as well. So please welcome Jaron Lanier.
All right. Hey. Are you all experiencing consciousness internally? Is interiority present, or are you merely phenomenological blobs of flesh with no interior experience? You know, the funny thing is that that answer is the answer. I used to get in, Daniel Dennett, you know, the philosopher, and I used to have a lot of fun arguing in front of audiences for money. And we found we got paid better when we were arguing with each other than if we were just saying whatever we were going to say. So totally capitalism, you know. And so anyway, my line back in the 90s with Dan was, the only way you can tell if there is actually an interior consciousness in a person is if they're a professional philosopher, and then they will tell you. And you know, the funny thing about that argument, it's a laugh line, but it's logically as consistent as anything else in this space of ideas. I think it's probably true. And so Dan does not experience consciousness. I love him anyway. It's fine. I'm not going to be picky about this, you know. Like, I don't really know what's going on with the cats either. You know, it's fine. It's all good. Cats, philosophers, you know. They both demand our resources, and we wonder, what exactly are we getting here? However, what I wish to tell you about is, in all sincerity, the position I've come to, which is through a different route, I suspect, than many in this room. Because usually when people think about these concepts of consciousness, or is there a noosphere, what's really going on with the universe, and what's the big picture here, usually we think about them as philosophy, or as religion, as faith, as thought experiments, once in a while as science. I don't have the luxury. I make technologies. I'm like out there, and we put this stuff out there, and then the world changes, even if it's stupid sometimes. And so for me, this is super pragmatic. So therefore, I have come to a position that I don't think was present in that little systemized ontology of ideas about consciousness from earlier. My position I will call pragmatic mystical dualism, with an emphasis on the pragmatic, okay? Now, why? What's pragmatic about being a mystical, crazy person? Now, if you're in Berkeley, you should not have to ask that question. However, I will pretend you did. It's even more important to ask it in Palo Alto, it turns out. So there's this thing called tech culture, which is the ideas and the culture of the people who make our technologies. We're mostly men, we're mostly youngish, we're mostly pretty narrowly educated, we mostly live in the peninsula in South Bay, we mostly live in a world of pitches and startups, we mostly get our PhDs at Stanford and MIT, we are into science fiction, we're into all kinds of things. But one of the things we're kind of into is a certain kind of eschaton, a destination, a cosmic progression that's different from the Chardin one. Maybe, I mean, it's kind of hard to really be sure how all these things compare, as has been brought out many times today already. But the idea that I think is very present is one that comes a little bit more from the history of science fiction, in which AI is portrayed in certain ways. And I'm thinking of the Matrix movies and the Terminator movies, and even, you know, old Mr. Hal from 2001. And the idea is that AI is turning into this new creature. It'll be smarter than us. And our job is to figure out how to talk to it really nicely so it'll like us. It's what I want to say is that almost invariably the people who hold this particular religion, who have enormous sway, have not yet had children. Now, when you raise children, you learn that if you talk to kids to try to get them to like you, it will not work. But if you have not raised kids yet, it's a plausible theory, isn't it? It's a plausible theory. It kind of works with cats, but they don't actually know what you're saying, I don't think. So there's this overwhelming majority of people who believe that. Including my friends and colleagues. Now, I should say, I have a bit of reputation for speaking somewhat with an acid tongue on these topics because I feel like I have to try to get through and it's hard. However, I don't say anything different to friendly audiences than I do to my friends who disagree with me. This is who I am. It's what I've been saying for 40 years, 50 years, God. When I was a kid, when I was a teenager, my principal mentor in computer science was a guy named Marvin Minsky. And Marvin is probably the person who did more than anyone else, except maybe Alan Turing, to promote this particular way of thinking about computers, that everything's computation, we're making successor, better computers than us, and maybe they'll be nice to us. But it's a sort of a cosmic duty to make them anyway, and they'll solve all the problems, and it's the only thing that really, really matters, because with enough intelligence, all the other problems get solved. So it's in a way, the problem. Many people believe that. Many, many, still to this day. People I work with every day. It's kind of funny. I used to love arguing with Marvin about this because I wasn't buying it. I always thought it was ridiculous. Marvin loved arguing with me. I was the only one of his proteges who just didn't buy it and gave him shit the whole time. Can I say that? It's Berkeley, right? I can, okay. Pardon my language, it can get a little salty. So the last time I saw Marvin, he was dying. I went to see him at his house near Boston, and a mutual friend called me when I was on the way. He said, "Oh, look, Marvin's very frail. Don't argue with him about AI. I mean, come on, like, just give it a rest." So I showed up. Marvin's on the couch in this crazy room that has like circus trapezes and tubas and weird early computers and bizarre instruments under construction, all kinds of crazy. It's like he's a wonderful, eccentric person. And he looks at me with this glint in his eye and he says, "Are you here to argue?" So we had the AI argument, and it was great. It was so fun. So what is the AI argument? Well, there's so many places to start this story. I don't even know how to begin. Among my students lately, who were almost all grad students from the, MIT, Stanford places, almost always, and they come in and they are really into this AI idea. They say, "Oh, we're going to build the AI will solve the problems, this is our job, the AI is coming alive, it's becoming generally intelligent, you can see it, it's almost there, it's about to do it." And so what I say is, okay, have you ever seen the drawings of an artist named M.C. Escher? They say, "Oh yeah, of course, Escher, he does all that great geometry and all that stuff, and he was inspired by the geometer Coxeter." They all know all about Escher. You guys all know Escher, right? Yeah, okay. So you know how Escher is fond of images that can do figure ground reversals, where you can look at a bunch of birds against a background, or fish. The background suddenly pops into being fish, and your brain can kind of flip back and forth. So I was saying, well, I don't think we know the absolute truth about what's going on with our programs or our brains or reality or anything. I think we have to live with some uncertainty there. But I want you to consider a very simple figure ground inversion. So one figure, let's say the birds, is the way you're thinking about it, that the AI is popping into reality as this new creature on the scene. But you can invert it, and it's not a creature anymore. And then they'll say, "Well, if it's not a creature, what is it?" And the answer is interesting to me, because the answer, obviously, is that it's a collaboration of people. Now, in order to explain this, and whether you think this is a noosphere or not, I leave to Catholic scholars, because I don't know if it is. I'm Jewish myself, and what we always do with these big questions is we punt. Like, on this question of, is the universe on the way to something? Well, we say, Tikkun Olam, we're repairing the universe. The universe exists only because of fragments, and we're repairing the fragments. But if we repaired them over the way, the universe probably wouldn't exist. It's like entropy. Like, if you have zero, it's terrible. If you have total, it's terrible. Somewhere in between is where things happen, right? And will we ever get there? Some Messiah someday, who knows, whatever. We don't talk about that. I like punting. I like Jewish punting. So it's different from the Catholics. They actually say, "Oh, no, we're going here." I'm like, okay. Okay, Paul, you go do that. Anyway, let's talk. In order to really talk about this, I'm going to get all concrete on you. and I'm going to tell you how AI works. And nobody's ever done that because it's taboo. We don't explain how it works because that makes it more mystical, and then you give us more money. Every time one of you is mystified by current AI, I get to buy another instrument because it makes more money for me. Seriously, I'm absolutely not kidding. So in a way, it's not in my personal interest to explain to you how it works, but I'm going to do it anyway because I have too many damn instruments. So here we go. I'm going to explain to you how AI works in 3 steps. It's really easy. And once you get how it works, you'll see this figure ground inversion, and you'll see how it can be thought of as a new collaboration instead of a new creature. Are you ready? Ready, 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 ready? Okay. We're going to start with a very simple question, which was a big deal until, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago or something, when it became obsolete as a controversy. Can you make a program reliably tell a cat from a dog? Cats again. Why am I talking about cats? It's because cats are so popular on the internet, and the reason they're popular is they represent our receding independence. Cats were not domesticated. They domesticated themselves. They can still live in the wild. They don't need us. They're around for the kibble. They know the game. They're not like dogs or cows or chickens or something. They never were colonized. And we long to be like that ourselves. That's our challenge in civilization, is to be cat-like. Therefore, they eternally are the mascots of the internet. But getting back to cats and dogs, if you're just looking at a picture, you can't observe the behavior, you can't rely on that. How do you do it? Well, there's a branch of math known as statistics, which is dealing with data and uncertainty. If you just take one statistic of an image, like how green is it overall, that will not tell you whether the image is of a cat or a dog, will it? If you take an infinite number and you can compare it to an infinite number of pictures, of course it will, obviously, except infinity is not available to us, so that's useless. I will digress again. I will digress. One of my students here at Berkeley, at this very campus, a few weeks ago, was saying, well, how can you say that AI isn't like people? Because there's this thing called Turing equivalence, which means that once you have a sufficiently powerful computer, and it's not a very high bar to meet at all, then it can do all the same things as all the other computers. So why couldn't some other computer do the same thing as your brain? To claim anything else would be to claim something supernatural, or so, right? I mean, it's math. And I was like, well, yeah, I want you to think about the number pi. You know pi? 3.1415926535897. Okay, pi, I memorized that when I was like a little tiny kid, and it's still stuck in there. I always wonder what better thoughts might be there if I hadn't taken them up with the digits of pi. But anyway, the question is, the pi digits never repeat. And what that means is that if you dig deep enough into the digits of pi, you can find every possible Turing machine implemented in every possible language, in every possible universe, in every possible variation, from every possible variation, from every perspective. Everything is in there. Pi has it all. Pi has all the brains that ever could be or not be or might almost be. Everything, it's in there. Not very useful to us, because we live in a world of costs and conservations and trade-offs. We can't get to all the digits of pi, obviously. But here's my question to you. Frequently, if you're in a math class, you are asked to divide pi by 2. When you do so, do you commit genocide? Do you? And so, as a mathematician, I have the delegated right to talk to pi. So I asked pi, how does it feel when you're divided by 2? We're feeding back. Should I? Anyway, and pi told me, I love the feeling of being divided by 2. Do it, do it. I love arithmetic. Pi loves it. So I don't think we have to worry about all those brains in there. And I think effectively, because of the problem of infinity, just because some hypothetical brain could be the same as your computer or vice versa, doesn't really mean a thing. So Turing equivalence doesn't bother me. But getting back to cats and dogs, are these digressions working for you? Is this too hard to follow? I'm kind of interested in pushing digressions so that we don't all lose our attention spans completely due to the smartphones. So this is good for you. This is like when I divide pi by 2. It's good for pi. Digressions are good for you. They're good for your brain. Exactly the same thing. Okay. If we make not an infinite number of statistical measurements of a picture to tell if it's a cat or a dog, but let's say a few hundred, and they're just very basic, like are the lines more parallel in the upper right-hand corner or not, that kind of stuff. Will it work? No, that won't work. What if we make another layer of measurements like that then do measurements secondhand on the results of the first batch of measurements? Will that work? No. What if we make a big pile of them? We call a pile like that deep. If you hear about deep learning, it's like there are a bunch of those layers. No, not yet, but what if we showed a bunch of cats and dogs where we know what's a cat and what's a dog, and then we allow little extra numbers into those statistics to decide how important each result was? They're called biases. We'll like make this result a bit more important than that one and so forth. Then we pile all that together. That's called training, setting all those little numbers. Will that work? Yeah, that works. And that starts to work. It's crazy, but it works. But it's not crazy, because think about it. Statistics are valid math, and enough measurements organized in some way ought to be able to do it, right? I mean, it would be weird if it didn't work. The thing that's a bit unsatisfying is that we don't necessarily know why any particular bias has to be what it is. And if we do the whole exercise another time, it won't come out the same, and yet it'll still work, and it'll never work perfectly. But that's what we call a neural network. We call each of these little statistical measurements a neuron because we want to believe it's a brain. We really, 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 really want to believe it, so we call it a neuron, and we call the thing a neural network. Is it like a biological neuron? Maybe a little. We don't quite know how those work. So that correlation is a bit of a work in progress. But anyway, we call them that. We call this thing a neural network. Now we can tell cats from dogs. Let's go to the step 2. That's step 1. Everybody get that? Do you believe it? I mean, it's what your phone does when it recognizes things. This is like totally, this is old by now. It's not that hard to do. Now we're going to go to the next step, which is what we're going to say. Oh, and by the way, just one other little digression. Have you ever been trying to do something important online, like schedule your COVID shot or something, and it says, oh, can you tell us if these pictures are fire hydrants or waterfalls, please? When you click them, we just want to verify you're really a human, that's all. That's you working for free for Google, training their neural networks. It's precisely what it is. It really pisses me off. I always hate it, but I have to do it. Anyway, what if you want to do more than cats and fire hydrants, and you want to do like everything? So then you take in the whole internet and everything else you can. That's why we scoop up so much data. And you make an assumption that if there's some text that's adjacent to a picture, it has something to do with the picture, which is not always true, but it tends to be true. And then you do exactly the thing I just described for cats and dogs, except you do it for all the pictures everywhere, and you train them on the text they're adjacent to instead of on the specific categories like cats and dogs. And now you have a categorizer for everything on the internet. That's step 2. Follow that? All right. Step 3 is you run this thing in reverse, and here's how it works. I'm going to do this for images because I find it a little easier to see it that way, but it works exactly the same for text and music and computer code and really any other kind of structured data that we want to do. We're going to start with a rectangle of snow, of random pixels. And we're going to say, is this thing a cat or a dog? Well, let's just start with a cat. Does it look like a cat? And it'll give us a score. And it'll say, not really, because it's random. And then you'll say, well, I'm going to mess it up some more. I'm going to mix in some more snow. Did it get a little more cat-like? If it did, you keep that. If it didn't, you throw that change away. And then you keep iterating, and then out of the snow emerges a cat that matches up with the training. What else could possibly happen, right? That's generative AI. Now, so far, all we've done is we've created an image that's similar to the images that it was trained on. However, where this becomes genuinely useful, and the reason this is such a big deal economically and socially, is that you can combine multiple targets, multiple criteria, and classifiers is the term we use for this. So if you say, I want a cat, but my cat's going to be on water skis. It's going to be playing a contrabassoon at the same time. And all this is going to be happening while it attends a conference about the noosphere at UC Berkeley. Can that happen? Well, every single time it plays with adding snow, it just sees if it checks all those boxes. And as long as it advances, you get that compound image. And that's generative AI. Now, there's a couple of interesting questions to ask here. One is this thing really useful? Yeah, I mean, my favorite example so far is we've chopped 40% off the hassle of programming. And the reason why is 40% of programming is incredibly tedious and similar, but not quite identical to what people have had to do a million times before. So you can use the generator to make a version of the thing that's been done a million times before that matches the thing you're doing and save the tedious part. That works. It's great. It makes programming less dehumanizing, can I say that? So I think in that case, I see something kind of cool. There's something I wish was different about it, which I'll get to, which is political and economic. How creative is this? How important is this? Well, those who say it's doing nothing new aren't quite right, because in satisfying the multiple classifiers, you can think of each of the steps that it has to build as being like a little tower that it builds up, getting closer and closer to a cat, closer and closer to water skis, and so on. And in order to get to them all at once, it has to fill in the space in between them. It has to come up with things that meet on both sides. And intrinsically, there's a kind of a problem solving that emerges of how exactly does a cat fit on water skis? How exactly does a cat hold a contrabassoon? And something comes out that doesn't violate the different classifiers, each of which is supported by a very large number of images. And somehow, in doing that, it has to invent solutions to bridge between the different elements that were used in the prompt. That is new. It's a new capability. You can call it creative. What it can't do is it can't build up beyond the gaps between those towers. So what I would say is it's a fill-in kind of creativity, but not a climbing kind of creativity. All right, and we have mathematical terms for that. When I say that, I upset some people. They say, how dare you besmirch the creativity and the potential of our AI? And I'm like, oh, come on, look at the math. Like, you know how this works. Like, let's just be honest with the people. What's there is amazing. It's really useful. We can also talk about how far it can go, which is not infinite. Okay, I have now explained AI to you. It's not a total or perfect explanation. It's probably about as good as your explanation for how a car works, which is good enough to get by. You are now joining the 0.0001% of the population who've had AI explained to them. So congratulations. Now, now here's the thing about this. And I spend all day trying to get this stuff to the world usefully. I'm called the prime scientist at Microsoft. This is what we're doing, you know. So I'm not opposed to the technology. I think it can bring good. I think it can be useful in a bunch of ways, and some of them are significant. I currently am of the belief that it'll pay for its carbon footprint, for instance, by making other things work better. I hope that's right, because it's got quite a footprint. Now, I talked about the figure ground reversal. In the figure ground reversal, what you see is that the whole thing is made of the data examples that went into it. One of the weird things about this generative AI, the current AI that everybody's excited about, is there's not a lot of code, and the code isn't that hard or esoteric. So when people say, oh, we're going to open source our AI, like, there's not really that much to open source. The truth is, this stuff isn't actually that hard. Like, I mean, my description to you left out some steps. Like, if I was describing a car, I wouldn't tell you what kind of metal you need to make a cylinder, but I've definitely left out some stuff, but it's basically not that hard. It's really all about the data, and the data comes from people. And so here we end up with something extremely interesting. Hey, actually, Terry, can I get feedback about something? How much time do I have? Am I going on, or am I within? I can go on more? Okay. As Terry knows, I'm perfectly happy to go on and destroy an event. And we still have music to play too. So if I'm destroying your evening plans, just say, hey, come on, guy, give it a break. All right. So AI. offer to you a philosophical tool that I started using in the late 70s when I was really small, when I was a zygote. And I think I invented it, but it might have been co-invented by Peter Singer, the animal rights person. I'm not exactly sure of the timing. At any rate, I don't know exactly whether I started it and it moved over to animal rights or not. At any rate, it's called the Circle of Empathy, and you might have heard of it. Here's how the Circle of Empathy works. You propose a circle around you. It says this is an abstract circle. Now we're back in philosophy. We're no longer going to ship this thing as a product, okay? So this is easier, actually. We're going to put a circle around you. Everything inside the circle, you're going to decide deserves empathy. So you don't bring rocks into the circle, generally, maybe some special rocks. But people are certainly in there. Then there are some things that are kind of at the edge, and there might be honest disagreements about where they should go. And these can include animals, fetuses for some, AI programs for some, and so on. Can't hear you, sorry. Oh, pi, the number pi. Yeah, well, the circle and pi have this conspiracy going. So you have to be really careful here, because they're like, and the circle wants to multiply pi times 2, so it's going to really mess with your head. But anyway, so the question is, well, if we're compassionate and if we're good people, shouldn't we want to just make the circle as big as possible? And that's the liberal impulse, I would say. The problem with the liberal impulse is at some extreme you become incompetent. So for instance, there are those who say, oh, I don't even want to kill a bacteria, but you cannot live without killing bacteria, and your teeth will get all grody. And so there's at some point you have to just accept the buy-in to the inherent cruelty of the system you're part of on some level, and just say, well, the parts that are the victims of the cruelty, I'll just say, are on the outside of the circle. Otherwise, you can't function. And there's maybe some other universe buried in pi somewhere in which that's not true. But anyway, in our universe, it is so. And it's one of the things that makes philosophy hard. Now, what about the conservative impulse to make the circle smaller and to say, let's get all these cretin hippie whatevers, these weird computer scientists with their dreadlocks, they don't belong in here. Get them out of here. All right, well, the problem with that is cruelty. That even though I think there's incredible uncertainty about what's really going on in this universe, is there consciousness, is there a noosphere, is this all going somewhere, all that stuff, we don't really get to know. I don't think we're privileged to find out. But I think there's some things that we can still hold on to, and surely kindness is one of those. And excessive conservatism, pulling in the circle too small, becomes cruel, because you start kicking people out. Immigrants, I don't know. So you have to, it's a tough one. I don't think there's any absolutely perfect way to know where the circle should go. I think we have to respect, to whatever degree we can, differences in thoughts about where the circle should go. Anyway, it's a tough topic. I think one of the things I like about the Circle of Empathy is it forces you to confront how genuinely tragically difficult this universe is, and to recognize that we don't have the luxury of getting it right, and that we might hurt others in the course of trying to get it right, and that it's actually just really hard, but we have to do our best. So I think that's our reality. Okay, should AI be in the circle or out of the circle? According to this theory, the danger of making the circle too small to include AI is being cruel to a program. The danger of making it too big is becoming incompetent. Which is the greater problem potentially with AI? Okay, I want to talk about the incompetence problem, which I think is very, very real. And there are many ways to go over this. The practical one for our society right now is we use AI algorithms, an earlier generation than the one I just described, but fundamentally with similar qualities, to guide the minds of people online in their social media and video and everything. We have created the illusion that people couldn't possibly navigate the complexity of the internet themselves, which is a falsehood, actually. There's a cognitive lack of charity towards the human mind that's at play here. But anyway, the assumption is No way, no way, no way could anybody do it. So it has to be the algorithm that guides them, and the algorithm will optimize for them. It'll find the videos they'll really like, it'll find the friends they really like, or the lovers, it'll find whatever. Okay, now I don't want to dismiss this entirely. I think in a lot of small situations, in some bubbles, this actually works to the benefit of people. An example I liked very early on when the internet started to work is people with rare illnesses finding each other who wouldn't otherwise. Fantastic. But there are many other examples like that. So finding good examples of this is not impossible at all. And I think there's a lot of good stuff. And dismissing it would be dishonest and in its own way cruel. But in the big picture, what we see is an almost uniform correlation with the use of these algorithms and psychological and social side effects from them that are really horrible. So what you see is a few years after algorithmic feeds show up for the first time in a country, you see their politics become more populist and more violent and more internally divisive. When it shows up in a young person's life, particularly girls, it ruins their psychology. Is that too hard a word? Not really. The statistics are startling. There are those who think that this is all bias and that people like me have created this illusion that it's worse than it is. I don't know. I mean, at this point, you could have said that when I was starting on this road of criticism, which was like 20 years ago now. But I think at this point, it's been studied so much by so many people, and there's so many whistleblowers from the companies and all that. I think it's pretty solid. I think we're doing damage. I think the particular way we do damage is very algorithmic. The human being is responsive to the environment in a multitude of ways. And I think just as with the circle of empathy, we have both sort of friendly and unfriendly ways of responding to our world. We can call them positive and negative emotions. It's a term sometimes used. The positive emotions are faith, charity, affection, trust, patience, hope. The negative ones are fear, aggression, irritability, vanity. Need I go on? All right, so these two things have somewhat different paths in the brain. There's a great deal of neuroscience about them. But the interesting thing is that the negative ones are elicited more quickly than the positive ones. If you look at a person in a longer time frame, you'll tend to see a balance. People are approximately, according to most researchers who've looked at this, roughly balanced between their ability to respond positively and negatively to the world. However, the negative responses come up faster. They're the twitch responses. They're the fight or flight. And since the algorithms are wanting their data, they respond to what you respond to faster. And so they naturally pull out the more negative ones to get you to pay more attention. And we've been working on this, and I say we, not me personally, but this is the Silicon Valley community. This has been known for a really long time, certainly over 2 decades now, probably like 2.5 decades. And there's just never been a way to consistently avoid this trap and still be economically viable. So again and again and again, we keep on drawing people into crap. We draw people into conflict, into an inability to see the good in others, and we have this astonishing divisiveness. It's been used politically, opportunistically by those. I should start moving towards music. All right. It's been used, for instance, in the Trump election, Putin's people used it to mess up America to some degree. It's impossible to know to what degree they affected events or the outcome of the election. However, certainly to some degree. I'm honestly terrified of where TikTok is going. I'm honestly terrified of where this thing that owns the young people now is going. So we have incompetence turning to cruelty when we pull AI inside the circle. Let's go back to the Turing test, which was Alan Turing's proposal for, computers are just other people. In the original thought experiment, you have a human judge who's being fed little messages, tweets, you could call them now, from a person and a computer, and has to decide which is which. And the idea is if the person can't decide, then you should give the computer equal rights. Rights, by the way, that were denied to Turing, who was essentially tortured to death for being gay after the war, after being one of the greatest war heroes. So I think there's a tragic element to the Turing test that's underappreciated. However, let's look at the situation. You have 3 people, 2 contestants, and 1 judge. 2/3 of the contestants are humans, and humans are ready to make themselves stupid to make computers seem alive all the time. If you have a social media feed, you are doing it today. It's demonstrable, it's real. So there's a 2/3 chance that the computers are not getting smart, but rather than the people are getting stupid. Therefore, the circle of empathy turns us against AI and prefers the other inversion where it's a collaboration of people. I only have a minute, but if you think of it that way, a very interesting bright future emerges where instead of AI displacing people, there are new roles for people who get praised and paid and fulfilled and appreciated for adding better data to the system in a multitude of ways into eternity. Instead of getting locked in what we've trained the AI for, you end up in an eternal creative cycle where the people are building the towers higher and higher for the AI to fill gaps between them. That would be a dignified future. Sometimes we call that data dignity. That's my talk. However, I'm not done because I'm going to play music. When speech stops, music starts. Music is wiser. And here's what I'm going to do. Let me introduce Mark Deutsch. Are you still awake after all that? Mark is, I've collaborated with Mark for decades at this point, and Mark has invented this instrument that you see next to him, and it's called the bazantar, and it's a cross between a double bass and an Indian instrument like a sitar. So it's a bass with extra sympathetic sounds and buzzy elements and stuff. And so it's this big wind instrument is called a contrabassoon. They were popularized by Beethoven. It's the lowest wind instrument in the Western orchestra. It goes as low as a piano. It's really great. And so there's this instrument called the Armenian duduk, and every once in a while I do weird instrument work for people's soundtracks, and every director, seriously, every director has asked the soundtrack composer, hey, I have like this especially wise character. Can you give me that sound of the wise instrument? And even though it's an Armenian instrument, I've seen it portraying the wisdom of an ancient Aztec shaman or a Chinese person or an alien. It's like the universal thing, but it's just that big. And I thought, I'm going to see if I can play Beethoven's giant instrument in the style of an Armenian duduk, because this is the damn noosphere. This is not some little alien getting a cue on a soundtrack. This is the noosphere. So we're going to do the contrabassoon. And I just need to soak my reed for a second. But let's see if this works. This is a whole new thing. We haven't tried this before. You're going to hear this experiment for the first time. Yeah, I like that boat. You want to start? Yeah. Mark on the bazantar. Hey, thank you so much for listening to our experiment with very, very, very low notes. And have a wonderful rest of evening. I'll see some of you, I'm sure. Good. Mark Gates!
Can you turn me on? There we go. What a treat. Wow. I hope you are as jazzed and energized humanly as I am. That is our formal program for the day. We in a few moments, are going to commence our welcome reception, and you are all welcome to join us for appetizers. You should have, those of you who have meal tickets, have a couple of drink tickets for tonight and a couple for tomorrow. Don't use them all at once. I want you to get back to your hotel safely. And hang around, enjoy the evening, have those conversations that you didn't have time for in our very packed day today. Tomorrow, the first plenary commences at 9 o'clock sharp. Ben Gertzel here in this room. We will have the check-in table open again at 8. So if you've lost something, missed something, have a question, feel free to show up early for that, and there will be coffee again. And we'll do this all tomorrow. And at the end of the day tomorrow, we have a banquet. So, yay, have a good evening.